Hi everyone, I'm Trish Connor-Cato and I'll be presenting Microsoft Access 2019. This video course is for beginner through experience level users looking to sharpen their skills and increase efficiency in Microsoft Access. Access is Microsoft's relational database application used to organize and store data. Access also has reporting capabilities. So what will you learn? We start with navigating a completed database while exploring the concept of relational databases and about the objects they contain, including how data is related between tables. We'll move on to learning the Access interface so you become comfortable in the working environment. Then we dive into how to plan, design, and create database tables. We'll continue by importing table data from Excel, as well as manually entering table data. Sorting and filtering techniques will be explored before we move on to exploring table relationships, which are the key to a successful relational database. We will create database queries, forms, and reports. We'll spend time on learning how table relationships affect queries, and how to automate queries and how to create action queries. Our advanced training starts with advanced report and form design techniques. We'll learn how to create switchboards, write macros, and use Access Visual Basic for applications, also known as VBA, for complex automation. We'll end by covering database security and customization options. This course has 6 modules. On the slide deck on my screen, you can see the lessons that are contained in Module 1. Feel free at any point to pause the video so you can study the screen. Module 1, Lesson 1, is an introduction into how databases operate. We'll get started by exploring a relational database that you will upload into Access once we get into the application. We'll go over the components of a database known as the database objects, and begin to explore how data is related between tables. We're going to use several files in this module. They can be found in the video description below. The files are listed on the slide. Feel free again to pause the video, go ahead and grab those files and put them in a folder on your desktop. Once you have the files, go ahead and open the Access application. Once you launch Access, you're on the welcome screen. We're going to use a pretty popular freeware database to explore the different components of a relational database. So on the left side of this screen, you're going to click on the New icon. And instead of scrolling through a bunch of database templates, we're going to search for it. So in the search bar, you're going to just type Northwind and press enter. You're going to click on the Northwind icon one time. And at this point, it's going to give it a generic database name. We're going to swap that name and just call it Northwind. More descriptive. And then you are going to click that little open file folder to the right of where you typed in Northwind, so you can navigate to the working directory where you saved all the files for this module. Go ahead and navigate to that directory now. After navigating, click OK, and it will bring you back to this screen where you're going to click on the Create button. It'll tell you that it's preparing the template for your use. And the first thing I'm going to point out is the obvious. You have this big screen, it's known as the startup screen, that's showing. It's telling you to use this sample database. You're going to look at that security warning, the yellow band, and you're going to click on Enable Content. Once you do that, it allows you access into the database. This particular database is very sophisticated. Much more sophisticated than the one that we're going to start creating from scratch. So it has a login dialog. Go ahead and just click on Login. And now you're in the Northwind database. Relational databases are effective because they relate separate database objects. So we're going to do a tour of the Access interface in just a little bit. But for right now, I want to focus on the objects that create a relational database. So on the left side of your screen, right now, the area is known as the navigation pane, and it's collapsed. So if you click that double arrow, it will expand the navigation pane. We're looking at, this is the Northwind database, we're looking at a customized navigation pane. We want to switch it to the default, and you'll learn more about the navigation pane a little bit later in the course. So to switch it to the default layout, we're going to do the drop down arrow. When you hover over it, it says Northwind Traders. And in that list up top, on the upper half of the list, you're going to click on Object Type. And so now, and I'm going to expand my navigation pane. If I put my mouse pointer in between it and the current form that's on your screen, I'll see that I get a double arrow and I can expand it. So this is showing all of the Access objects that make up this relational database. We have tables, queries, forms, reports, macros, and modules. I'm going to just bring up a slide to explain what these different objects do. We'll look at each of these objects in just a moment, but it's important for you to know what object does what. Tables are the only objects that store your data in a relational database. You use queries to get information about your data. You can ask questions of your data. You can use forms for a variety of purposes. They can be used for data entry or to display information to the user. When we first got into the Access database, the Northwind database, it was a form that displayed that told us to go ahead and click Enable Content. Your database reports can be distributed. Macros in Access, just like they do in other Office programs, automate tasks. And the modules in Access automate tasks using Visual Basic for Application programming language. We're going to take a look at examples of each of these objects in the Northwind database now. We're going to use the navigation pane on the left side to explore these objects and see how they work. So I'm going to just expand tables. Notice the drop down arrow to the right of it. I'm going to click on it. And if you scroll through this list, you'll see all of the tables that are in this Northwind database. Notice the icons. Kind of looks like an Excel spreadsheet. Let's double click Customers to open that table in what's known as Datasheet View. Tables have two different views, which you'll learn as we go through the course. In Datasheet View, you can see that it looks very similar to an Excel spreadsheet where you have columns of data. Each column has a column heading, the name of the column, as you can see on the screen. And in Access databases, the columns are known as fields. And then you have rows of data. A row of data is known as a record. So the first row of data could be said to be Anna Beddick's record of data. You'll notice all of the fields, so the company, last name, first name, so on and so forth. You'll learn about how to navigate in tables when we start building our own database from scratch. In the meantime, what I'm going to do, you'll notice the tab right above the company field, and it says Customers. I'm going to right click on that tab, and I'm going to choose Close. So now I'm just back to the form when we went into the database. Once we got past the login screen, this is the form that displays. Remember, tables are the only database objects that store your data. I'm going to collapse tables now and expand queries. If you want to expand your navigation pane so you can see the full query name, feel free to do so. And the query we're going to explore is product category sales by date. If we double click it, it opens. It looks very similar to a table of data, but it's actually the results of the query. So this particular query, product category sales by date, is showing the order date, the sum of the quantity, and the category. Queries have multiple views. Tables only have 2, queries have 3, and we'll explore those views as we go through the course. Right now, we're going to close the product category sales by date query by right-clicking its tab and choosing close. And then I'm going to collapse queries. Go ahead and close that form that's on the screen. It's called the home form. Now, if you don't want to use the tab to close it, all the way to the right, you'll see a X. And you can use that X to close any database object that you want to get off of your screen. I'm typically in the habit of just right-clicking the tab. So either way you want to use it, go ahead and close that form and then expand forms in the navigation pane. So the name of that form was the home form. It's the form that shows up on the screen after you log in. Go ahead and double click home in the forms list and it opens up the form again. We're going to collapse forms and expand reports in your navigation pane. We have a report called Top 10 Biggest Orders. You can double click on it and you can see it. And so this is something that can be distributed. You can distribute the report in a variety of different ways. It's readable, user-friendly. And this one just happens to be showing the top 10 biggest orders out of all the orders in the database. Go ahead and close that report. And by the way, reports actually have 4 different views, and you'll learn those views as we go through the course. And I'm going to collapse reports in the navigation pane. Let's expand macros. So macros give you the ability to automate tasks. If you've ever recorded a macro in Excel or you've ever written one using Visual Basic, it's a little bit different in Excel. In Access, you actually build the macro. It's not a recording of what you're doing in the application. So there is a macro called AutoExec in the Northwind database. By the way, you can only have one AutoExec macro in a database. And if you want to take a look at what the macro is doing, you can right-click on it on AutoExec and go to Design View. So what it's doing is when we first got hold of the Northwind database and we had that opening screen that said enable, click on enable content, the reason why that came up is because the current project is not trusted. Okay? So if the current project is not trusted, and you'll learn about macros later in the course, so this may look very confusing to you. If the current project is not trusted, then it opens that form, the startup screen, and that's the form that tells you to enable content. If the current project is trusted, meaning the Northwind database, then it opens the login dialog. And so in our case, it's not trusted. We haven't saved it to a trusted location is what that's talking about. And you'll learn more about that later in the course. Go ahead and close the AutoExec macro. And this time, just double click it. And that runs it. So it's going to bring in the login dialog, and when we log in, it's going to take us back to this home screen because at this point we've already accessed it, we've saved it, and it's considering it to be trusted. We can collapse macros now. And then modules are a little bit more intense because they deal with writing Visual Basic for application code. So right-click on your inventory module and go to Design View. And it takes you into the Visual Basic for Applications editor window where you're seeing all of this VBA code. You'll learn a little bit more about this in the course. We're going to go ahead and close that editor window, and we can collapse modules now. In a relational database, the data is stored in tables, and the tables have relationships between the differing data sets. We're going to examine these relationships in a little bit more detail. So tables have the relationships between them, and then tables also have related objects like queries, forms, reports, macros, modules. So in order to see how tables are related to each other, we're going to go up to the ribbon, and we're going to go to the Database Tools tab on the ribbon. When you go to Database Tools tab, you'll see on there that you have the opportunity to access the relationships window, and that's where we want to go right now. It looks like a hot mess in here, especially if you're not used to seeing a relationships window before. So I'm going to just make this a little bit cleaner. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just move this employees table tile over a little bit and move orders over, so I can clearly see the relationship between orders and customers, which is indicated by this line between the two tables. It's known as a join line. Notice on the customer side of the join line, it has the number 1. And on the order side of the join line, it has what appears to be the infinity symbol. That is indicative of a one-to-many relationship. In plain English, you could say that one customer has many orders. In order to relate a table to another in a relational database, there has to be a common field between the two tables. Good database design would say that the common field should be called the same exact thing between the two tables, but sometimes you won't see that. Makes it easier if they're named the same. So Access doesn't care what you name the field, but it just makes it easier on the person who is creating the database if they have a common name. Now, this is an instance where the name is not common, but we can deduce what it is. In the customers table, it's using the ID field. The ID field is known as a primary key field. You'll learn more about this later in the course when we create our database. And a primary key field is used to make every record in the table unique. So even if you had two customers with the name James Brown, their IDs would be different, noting that they're two separate individuals. So the ID field in the customers table is the primary key. It's also what's used to relate it to the orders table. In this case, in the orders table, it is called the customer ID field. So one customer ID can be on many orders in the orders table. That is the common field that makes the relationship possible. You'll learn more about different relationship types, what you can do with the joins in a later part of this course. I'm going to go ahead and click the close button on the ribbon to get out of the relationships window. It asks me if I want to save my changes to the layout. I'm going to say no. I moved some table tiles around, so it won't save those changes. And now we're back to the home form that came up earlier. This is a good time to start exploring the Access interface. Like all the other Microsoft products, Access 2019 has the Microsoft ribbon. And on the Home tab, you can see you have your traditional clipboard group, a sort and filter group, and we'll be using the ribbon extensively as we go through this course. You have the Create tab on the ribbon. When you're going to create stuff, you're going to become intimately acquainted with this tab, as well as the External Data tab. If you want to bring stuff into or send stuff out of Access, this is the tab you're going to be working from. We have our Database Tools tab where we just went to get to the Relationships window. You'll learn a little bit later about some of the other options here. You can see that they have a macro section and they also have an Analyze section, which we'll visit later in the course. You have your Help tab on the ribbon. Another way of getting help is using the light bulb over here. Tell me what you want to do. And then because we're in a form, the Home form, you have the Contextual ribbon tab. Under the banner Form Tools, you have Form Data Sheet. So if we wanted to do some formatting on this form or look at the property sheet, so on and so forth, that would be the tab that we would be using. Again, that tab would only be on your ribbon if you absolutely have a form open. So you also have some other things at the bottom. If you look at the bottom of the form in particular, the Northwind Traders form, you have a record navigation section. And that can be used if you have multiple records and you want to go through them in a form. Tables have these. Most objects have these navigation areas. So you'll get some extensive hands-on experience with that as well. And then we have the status bar. Now, for this form, it's all the way at the bottom of your screen. So the status bar, depending on what object you're in, can display different information, and also depending on what view of the object you're in. So this is giving the end user additional information about this form. It says double click to go to details down in the status bar. So if I'm on that form and I have this first active order selected, I should be able to double click to get to details for that particular record. You'll also learn how to populate the status bar during this course. To the right of your status bar, you have your different view buttons, and you'll learn about different views again as we go through these different objects when we create our own database. Now we're going to get into creating a new database from scratch. The database that we're going to create is not going to be as extensive as the Northwind database that we've been viewing due to our time constraints. But you do have the Northwind database, and you'll learn how to examine its objects so that you can recreate them if the need arises. We're going to start by going over the planning steps to create a new database, and then move on to actually creating the different objects. When it comes to planning a new database, you have to be clear on its intent. You would want to confer with colleagues to figure out, is a database even really needed? And then what would be its business purpose? Who will use it? And how will the end users be trained? That's something that's often overlooked by the person building the database. Typically, they're the person that's going to train the end users on how to use it. There are a few naming conventions that you should become familiar with. We didn't see the actual prefix in the Northwind database, but when we build our database, we're going to use these object prefixes. It helps to identify them. So the way that you name a table, there's some examples up there. TBL customers. The name of the table is usually pluralized. TBL is the prefix that we use for tables to identify them in a database. If the table name has multiple words, you'll see the example of TBL order details, with the O and the D capitalized all mushed together. This is a standard convention that's used for naming database objects. So I'll direct you as we're creating our database, but you use the prefix QRY for queries, FRM for forms, RPT for reports, MCR for macros, and MOD for modules. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and use the File tab on the ribbon to close the Northwind database. So when you do File, you'll see the close option right there. And now you're in Access, but you don't have a database open. We're going to start a new one from scratch. So we're going to go back to File on the ribbon, and we're going to click on New again. And this time we're going to click once on Blank Database. And we're going to name this database Office Supplies, and we're going to put it in our working directory. So remember to use that file folder to the right to navigate to the directory that you want to save the database in. Go ahead and save the database as Office Supplies. And click Create. When you create a database, a new blank database, it gives you one table. It names it Table 1, and it opens it in Datasheet View. Database tables require a separate planning process, which we're going to review right now. So we'll go over the planning steps for the tables, create the tables in Design View, and then you'll learn how to import data into the tables from Excel. Think of your database tables as a multi-subject planner for one topic. In our case, we're creating an office supplies database. So that's our topic. And in the planner, you have related subjects, which are your tables. You use one table per one subject. Typically, you'd want to plan your tables on paper first, conferring with colleagues, making sure what you're calling the table, what you're going to name it, and what you're going to name the fields in the table. It's important to make sure that they're understandable to the end users. And then you also are going to want to break down your data to the lowest form. So for example, if you have a customer name field, if you want to be able to sort that field, you would want to split it into multiple fields, perhaps customer first, customer last, customer middle, if you're capturing that. You don't want to put it all in one field, because then it's hard to sort it. So address fields, you typically will have address 1, address 2, city, state, and zip, not just one address field. So on this slide, I have a sample plan for the customer table that we're going to build, giving you all the field names that we're going to be using in that table. So we need a unique identifier field, a primary key field, and we're going to call it customer ID. So each customer record is a unique record, because even if everything else is the same in the record, the customer ID will be different. We're going to have company name, address 1, address 2, so on and so forth in this table that we're going to create. As mentioned, when we created from a blank database, it gave us one table and it put it in Datasheet View. We're going to right-click on that Table 1 tab, and we're going to go to Design View. I typically create my new tables in Design View, and you'll see why in just a moment. At this point, it wants us to save this table and give it a name. So we're going to use our object prefix, TBL, all lowercase, and then customers, plural, with a capital C, and click OK. So now it switched us to Design View. If you notice in your navigation pane, as well as on the Table tab, it's updated the name from Table 1. Now in Design View, you can name your fields that are going to be in the table, and you can assign a data type. When you name the fields in the table, the description, which is optional, if you're in the table in datasheet view, that description will show in the status bar. So we saw a description for a form that showed in the status bar in the Northwind database earlier. So the blank table only gives you one field. It's called ID, and it set it to an auto number field, and it also made it the primary key field, which is indicated by the little key icon in the row header to the right of ID. So you'll see that, and also on the ribbon you'll see that the primary key button is shaded, meaning it's active for that field. So we want to change the name of the field. We don't just want it to be called ID. We're going to just put the word customer in front of it. And an auto number field means that the end user will not be typing in the customer ID. It will start with the number 1 for the first customer, then it will go to number 2 for the second customer. Access will control that. So we're going to leave that data type at auto number. We're going to go to the next field name entry. The next field name is company name. Typically you won't see spaces in the field names, just initial capital letters for every word. And when you tab over to the data type, it defaults to short text, which we're going to leave it on. The next field that we're going to input for this customers table, we're going to do address 1. That's also going to be short text. Then we'll do address 2. Then we're going to have city, also short text. The next one would be state and zip. Now we're leaving zip short text. We're not going to be doing any calculations on the zip code, so they can be a text field. If you're going to be doing calculations on a numeric field, then you would want to make it some type of a number field. But in our case, we're good with just leaving it as a text field. The next field is going to be phone. And we're leaving all of these at short text for right now. We have email, but then the email field, when you tab over the data type, you can either do the drop down, which I'm going to do, and you can see all the different data types. For an email, we'd want it to be a hyperlink. So from within Access, you can click on the hyperlink and have it generate your email in your email program. So email is the hyperlink data type. We have 2 more fields. We're going to do active, and this one we're going to do the data type drop down, and we're going to choose yes, no. Or you could have just typed the letter Y over there and it would automatically populate it with yes, no. So yes, no, when we take this table to datasheet view, presents as a checkbox. If it's checked, it means yes. If it's not checked, it means no. And we have our last field, which is employee, and we're going to leave that as a short text field. Now you'll notice on the bottom half of the screen, you have a field properties area on the bottom half of the screen. And we're going to change a couple of properties for just a couple of these fields for our customers table. So what we're going to do on the upper half, where you've listed all your field names and their data types, right? We're going to click on the state field, and now that's the active field. And so the field properties are for the state field. For a short text field, the default field size is 255 characters. Well, we want to force the end users to make sure the states are only 2 characters. So we're going to change the field size property to 2. And we're just going to tab out of that field size area. Now you're in the format area. In the format area, we also wanted to force it to uppercase. So regardless of how the end user types it in, it will only be 2 characters and we want it to be uppercase. So we're going to do the greater than symbol in the format field property, which is how you force something to be uppercase regardless of how it's typed in. And then for the phone field, we're going to do something. So on the upper half, we're going to click on the phone field in the field list on the upper portion of the screen. And, you know, people type phone numbers a host of different ways. Some people put the area code in parentheses. Some people just don't, and they put a dash between the area code and the first 3 digits. So we want consistency. Consistency is key in a database. We don't want end users typing phone numbers any way that they want to. We want it to be a consistent format. To be able to do that, we're going to put what's called an input mask on the phone field. So in the field properties, you're going to click in the box that says input mask. And then all the way over to the right, I always use the wizard to do this instead of typing an input mask myself, because it could be tricky proposition. So all the way over to the right of the input mask field, you'll see that ellipsis button. And you're going to click that, and that will take you into the input mask wizard. Since we've made changes to this table, we have to save it first. So just go ahead and click yes. And then it takes you into the input mask wizard. There's already an input mask for phone number. That's the first on the list. It's selected. And we want it in that format. So we're going to do next. And now the only thing here is we want to require the area code. Right now, you'll notice that the area code is populated with 9s, which means it's optional. So we're going to change those 3 9s to 0. And after you do that, you're going to get rid of, and it's kind of like in overtype mode. So you'll see it just overwriting the 9s with 0s. And then we want to get rid of the exclamation point before the opening parenthesis. When the area code is optional, we want it to fill from the right of the phone number. So you don't get a situation where it starts the phone number where the area code should be. And that's what the exclamation point is controlling. Now that we made those numbers for the area code required, we can get rid of that exclamation point because we won't be needing it to be there anymore. So you want to delete that. We're not going to change the placeholder character. You'll see what that looks like when we actually complete this table and start entering records into it. And we're going to just do next. So the last question is, how do you want to store the data? This only applies to if you're going to export the data out of Access. So if you export a phone number without the symbols, it'll just be all numbers, none of the symbols. I always like to export it with the symbols in the mask, so I'm going to make that choice here. And then I'm going to do next, and I'm going to finish. So that's set up. If you look at that input mask, if you had manually typed it, you would have had to type it the way that it is showing in the input mask field. I think using the wizard is far easier. Now we're going to create another table, the employees table. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the tab, and I'm going to right click on it and close my customers table. So notice it's asked me, do I want to save changes to the design of the customers table? Since we were forced to save it, we made several design changes, including some properties. So we're going to go ahead and say yes to that. And it just shows in our navigation pane. Now we want to create another table. So we're going to go up to the Create tab on the ribbon, and we want to do it in Design View. So in the Tables group, on the Create tab, you're going to go ahead and click on the Table Design button, and it brings you into what's now called Table 1, because we renamed that to TBL Customers for the other one. And this one does not have a primary key or an ID field at all. You only get that when you start from a blank database. That initial blank table that they give you is set up that way. But any other tables you create, you're going to have to set up your own primary key field in the table. So Access will notify you if you go to save a table without a primary key, but it doesn't care whether you set one or not. So you're going to have to be on top of that. So we're going to do the employees table now, and the first field name is going to be employee ID, and we're going to make that an auto number field. Again, unless we already had existing employee IDs that we wanted to use, we can use auto number. We only have 3 more fields for this table. So the next field is going to be employee last, and that's going to be short text. Notice that I'm mushing all the words together. I'm not using any spaces in my field names. Then we have employee first. And lastly, we're going to have extension. And again, we're not doing any calculations using the numeric extension, so we're going to leave that as a short text field. Now we have to save this table, so right-click on the tab and go to Save, and we're going to call it TBL capital E Employees, and click OK. So this is where it tells us there is no primary key defined. Although a primary key isn't required, it's highly recommended, right? You won't be able to create a relationship with another table. Do you want to create a primary key now? I'm going to go ahead and say yes, and it will just put it on the first field in the list. Now, let's say we decided before getting that prompt that we wanted to do the primary key. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the employee ID field, and I'm going to click on primary key on the ribbon to remove it. So to get it back, I can do it by the same method, just the opposite. I can go click primary key on the ribbon, or I can right click on it and choose primary key. So that's how you can manually set it. Go ahead and save and close your employees table. So we've manually created 2 tables in Design View, and now we're going to use the Import Data from Excel feature to get the other tables that we're going to use in this database. When you import from Excel, you have 3 different options. You can import into a new table, which we're going to do next. You can append a copy of records into an existing table, which is how we're going to partially populate the customers and employees tables that we've created. Or you can link to the data source by creating a link table, which we'll cover in a later module. For right now, we're going to import our other table data using the Import into New Table feature. One of the files that you receive from the video description is Import into Access, and we're going to be utilizing that file to bring our other tables for our database in. So in order to do that, we're going to go to the External Data tab on the ribbon, and the first button is New Data Source, and you're going to hover over From File and click on Excel. And then you're going to need to use the Browse button over on the right to browse to your working directory and double-click the Import into Excel file that's in your directory. Once the file name is populated, you'll notice the bottom half of the screen. You have your choices there. Import the source data into a new table in the current database. That's the choice we're going to stick with right now. In a little while, you'll learn how to append a copy of the records to an existing table. And later in the course, you'll learn how to link to the data source by creating a link table. So all we have to do is click OK on this screen. And you'll see at the top of this Import Spreadsheet Wizard, it's showing the worksheets that are in that Excel file. So we've already built customers and employees tables. We haven't populated them. We're going to click on Categories, and you'll see sample data that's in that Excel file. And we're going to do Next. The first row does contain column headings. It detects that. That's your category ID and category. And so we're going to do next. Now up top, you can give it some field options if you want up top. I usually do this once the data is in Access. So I'm going to just do next on this screen. And it's saying, let Access add primary key. It defaults to that. So now you have another ID field, which we don't want. We're going to use category ID as our primary key. So we're going to select the option button, choose my own primary key, and it defaults to the first field, which is category ID. And we're going to do next. So import to table. So again, this is into a new table. The only thing we have to do, we want the table to be named categories, but we want that object prefix of TBL in front of it. And then we're going to just click finish. We're not going to import from this particular table again, so we don't have to save the import steps. We could, doesn't hurt anything. So go ahead and check save import steps, and we'll leave the default name. You could also create an Outlook task, which we don't have to do here. And we're going to do save import. And so now we have our categories table. Now, let's just take a second here and look at this. If we double click TBL employees, we don't have any records in it. And I'm going to close it. And the same would be true for customers. But if you double click TBL categories, you have the records in the table because they were in the Excel spreadsheet. And I'm going to close that one. So now we want to import other tables. So this way, let's use the saved import. On the external data tab, click on saved imports. And there's our import into Access. It's already selected. You could change the name of it at that point if you want. And we're going to do run at the bottom. So this is going to want to overwrite the existing table categories. We're going to say no here. So we're going to just start it from scratch again. I'm going to go ahead and close that. Go back to new data source, from file, Excel. You're going to browse again and navigate to your working directory and select the import into Access Excel file again. Once you do that, you're going to go ahead and click the OK button. And this time, we're going to select Order Details. So after Order Details, we have two more tables. I'm going to have you pause the video after we work through this one together and come back and repeat the same steps and bring in the Orders table and the Products table, just remembering to put the TBL in front of the name. So here's all the information that's in that Excel spreadsheet. We're going to do next. It contains column headings. It's next again. We're not doing anything on this screen, so next again. And you're going to choose your own primary key, and we want the order detail ID field, the first field. And next, and you just got to put the TBL in front of the table name. And you're going to do finish. And we're not going to save the import step, so you can just close that. Now, at this point, I want you to pause the video, go to New Data Source, Excel, from File Excel, and grab those two other sheets so that they come in as new tables. So now your navigation pane should be populated with the 6 tables we're going to be using. You brought in orders and products. Now that we have our tables in Access, we're going to make some modifications to the products table. So if you right click on the products table and you go to design view, it opens in that view. If you just double click on it, it's opening in data sheet view. So we have a product manual field name here, and the data type is short text. We actually have 2 product manuals that we want to use as attachments in the database. So we're going to change short text to attachment data type just for the product manual field. So it's letting me know, because I brought this in from Excel, it's not going to let me set it to a different data type. So I'm going to click OK on that. And I'm going to delete that product manual field by right-clicking on its row header and choosing Delete Row. And I'm going to click Yes to permanently delete it. And then what I'm going to do, I'm on the category ID field, and I'm going to use the Insert key on my keyboard to create a new row above it, right where Product Manual used to be. And I'm going to name that field Product Manual. And I'm going to give it the attachment data type. And then I'm going to save that table. And I'm going to right click on the tab again, and I'm going to switch to Data Sheet View. So you'll notice that you have the paperclip icon, right? It doesn't say the name of the field. It just shows a paperclip icon for the name of the field when you make it into an attachment data type. Let's right click on the tab and go back to Design View. I don't want just a paperclip to show, so I'm clicking in the Product Manual field, and down in the field properties, the caption property will overwrite what that column heading says. So there I'm going to put Product Manual, all mushed together because the other field names are mushed together. If I wanted the header in Datasheet View to be different, so say for product name, I could caption that field product space name. But we're not going to take the time to do that in this course. We just want the product manual to say product manual instead of the paperclip icon. So now I'm going to just save this table. And then I'm going to right click and go back to Datasheet View. And you can see that it now says Product Manual at the top for that field heading. Now, there were 2 Word documents in the video description that you should have already put in your working directory, or if you need to pause and go get them, that's fine. And one of them is called Super Duper Cash Register description or instructions, and the other is Simple Cash Register instructions. So what I'm going to do, we're going to access them from within here. And just like in Excel, like I want my product name field to be wider, so I'm going to put my mouse between product name and price headings and double click. That's very much like how you do it in Excel. And I'm going to go to the attachment field for the Super Duper Cash Register. And in that field, I'm going to right click and I'm going to choose Manage Attachments. So now you're going to click on Add, and you're going to navigate to your working directory where you save the files from the video description, and you're going to grab the Super Duper Cash Register Word document. Once you do that, you're going to click OK. And notice now it has a 1 next to the paper clip in that record, indicating that there is 1 attachment. If you wanted to access that attachment, you would right click right in that paperclip field again, go back to Manage Attachments, and you can see over on the right that you can open the attachment from in here or remove it. You could save it with a different name. If you had multiple attachments, you could save all of them at the same time. So we're going to just cancel out of there. Now we have another attachment, and that's for the Simple Cash Register record. So I'm going to right click on the paperclip, Manage Attachments, click on Add, and grab the Simple Cash Register Word document. And then just click OK. So we've added the attachments. We started by trying to change the data type of that field, and it wouldn't let us, mostly because it came in from Excel. And so we deleted that field and recreated it and gave it the attachment data type. Go ahead and close your products table. And we did do layout changes, so it's only going to ask for layout changes. So we're going to select yes to save those changes. Now we're going to populate our customers and employees tables partially from Excel. So we're going to be using that same import from Access file and the same wizard that we used before. So What I like to do, especially if I'm bringing in data into multiple tables, is in the navigation pane, and you don't have to do this. I like to click on the table that I'm getting ready to use just to keep myself on track. Makes no difference in access whatsoever, whether it's clicked or not. So on the external data tab of the ribbon, I'm going to go back to new data source, from file, Excel, and I'm going to navigate to my working directory to that import into access Excel file. Import into access is what you're browsing for. This time on the lower half of the screen, we're going to use the option button, append a copy of the records to the table. Now this is always going to default to the first table in the list, which is in alphabetical order. I clicked on customers just to remind myself that that's the table that I want to import into. So I'm going to do the drop down where it says TBL categories and select TBL customers, and I'm going to do OK. Similar screen, it's showing you those sheets that are in Excel. You're going to make sure you're on the customer sheet. It's the first one in the workbook, so it should already be selected there. And we're going to do next. It dims out first row contains column headings because the column headings are already in the table. We set up the column headings when we created it, so that doesn't matter here. And we're going to do next. It's importing to TBL customers. Once you click finish, you can double click your customers table in the navigation pane, and you can see that those records have been imported. I'm going to just go ahead and close the customers table. But before I do that, let me say this. On a form, it will show as a checkbox, but that active field, we made it a yes/no data type. So -1 in this instance means yes, and a 0 would represent no. So now I'm going to go ahead and close that table. I'm going to have you follow the same steps to bring in information into the employees table. So go ahead and pause the video to do that. So when you're done, you can open your employees table and you'll see that it's populated with 29 records. I'm going to go ahead and close it. So far, we've populated our tables by importing data from Excel into Access. Now you're going to learn how to manually enter data directly into a table and pick up some data entry shortcuts and techniques along the way. We'll be using the manual data entry Word document that was in the video description. So I have that document open on my screen right now. We're going to actually enter 2 customers into the customers table and 2 employees into the employees table based on the information in this document. So we're not going to use the yellow shaded entries at this time. We'll use those later on in the course. So just customer IDs 17 and 18 and employee IDs 30 and 31 are what we're going to enter. So back in Access, I'm going to just double click the customers table to open it in Datasheet View. And after the last record, customer ID 16, you'll notice in the row underneath that, customer ID says new. So we made our customer IDs auto number fields, which means we're prevented from typing one in. So we're going to click in the first blank company name field, and we're going to start typing our entry. So the first company we're going to enter is called Astro Advertising. And as soon as you start typing it, notice it gives a customer ID of 17. It's incrementing them by 1. And we're going to tab over to the address 1 field. Tabbing is the best way to work when you're entering data in tables. The address is 17 Main, and then we're using ST for street. So you want to be consistent. We brought a lot of this data in from Excel. In Excel, they're using ST for street. So we're going to repeat that theme here in Access. We don't have an address 2. So we're going to go over to the city field by tabbing, and the city is Houston, and then tab over to the state field. So remember, when we designed this table, we made the state field so it will only have 2 characters and they'll be forced to be uppercase. So try to type Texas, and after you type the second character, it's not going to let you. So backspace, and just type TX, and I'm doing it in lowercase. And when I tab, you'll notice that it puts it in uppercase. That was the greater than symbol in the format field property for state. So now we're ready to enter the zip code, and that is 77084. And we're going to tab. And so the phone number field is where we put an input mask, so it will format the phone numbers like the rest of them above it. So we're just going to type in the raw numbers. If you're training end users on how to use a database like this and you've done an input mask, you need to tell them just type in the raw numbers, no punctuations. So we're going to just type in 713. As soon as we type 7, you'll see the input mask. It puts the parentheses around it. It's flashing where the next field is, that's available to enter in. So we're going to just do 5557633. And we're going to tab. Now we're at the email field. It's astro@houston.com, and notice it's showing as a hyperlink because that's the data type that we set on the email field. Now, Astro Advertising is not an active client, so we're going to do, it is an active client, so we're going to put -1 in there for active. On a form, it will show as a checkbox, so you won't have to worry about knowing whether it's -1 or 0. And typically with a relational database, you would want your data entry to be done on a form, not necessarily in the table. The table is the only thing that holds the data, so you don't want a lot of people going into the table for data entry. You'll learn how to create forms that they can use for data entry in a future lesson here. So all we are missing now is it has employee numbers in here. For this one, we're going to just put in the employee name. So the last name of Brewster. And we'll come back in. It had the numbers in the spreadsheet, or it brought them in as by their ID numbers. So we can address that later. What we're actually going to want to do later is have a drop-down list so the end users can select the employee and not have to type it in, which lends itself to more consistency. Now what I'm going to do to save this record, you don't have to do a save here. You only have to save layout changes. So if we were to go into design view and change a data type or do a field property, those are the types of changes that need to be saved. Records that you're entering are saved when you navigate out of that row. So I'm using my down arrow to go to the next row, and that saved record with customer ID 17. So now I'm in the company name field under Astro Advertising. We have one more to enter here, and it's Waters R Us, kind of like Toys R Us. The address is 1 Waterfall Lane. And for lane, they are actually spelling out the word lane. And we're going to go over to the city. That's Citrus Heights. Tab to the state, and it's CA for California, and the zip code is 95610. Our phone number 916-555-4311. We do not have an email for this customer, and this customer is not active, so we're going to leave active on 0, which means it's not active, and therefore they don't have an employee attached to them. So I'm going to just use my down arrow, and then I'm going to close the customers table. Now you're going to double click your employees table, and using the same Word document and the same method, you're going to enter 2 employees at the bottom of this table. Go ahead and pause the video to do that. Just a quick note. If you look down at the status bar right now, it just tells you that you're in datasheet view. Let's switch. So you should have added the employee IDs 30 and 31. And we're going to switch. We're going to right click on the tab and switch to design view. For the description, for the extension field, just put in 4-digit extension. and then switch back over to datasheet view. And it's going to prompt you to save your changes. That is a design change. Those are the changes that need to be saved. So we're going to say yes. And now you're back in datasheet view. If you click in any of the extension fields, you'll see in your status bar that it shows that description. So we saw that for a form earlier. It's by using that optional description field that information will show up in the status bar, which could be helpful for the end user. Now that we have most of our data into the database tables, you're going to go into how to rearrange your records by sorting them. And there's some cool ways to sort and filter data in Access. And the filtering is especially cool. A lot of these filtering things started in Access and now are in Excel as well. So in addition to sorting, you'll be hiding records by filtering. I'm going to use the customers table for this. This time, go ahead and leave the employees table open. You can have more than one object open at the same time. I'm going to just double click TBL customers, and notice now I have the two tabs, one for employees and the active one is for customers. So we're going to get into sorting and filtering data here, starting by sorting. So we decide that we want to see our customer records sorted by state. So in order to do that, I mean, it's a Microsoft product, so there's multiple ways of doing the same thing. We could use the home tab of the ribbon. It has a sort and filter group. Or I normally do it right at the column heading, the field heading. So where it says state, I'm going to do the drop down. And I'm going to just do sort A to Z. So I have all of my California customers grouped together, and then Idaho, Illinois, so on and so forth. So that is an easy way to sort. If you look at the drop down arrow next to state now, it has a thin up pointing arrow right next to it because that's showing that that field is sorted and specifically in ascending order. So when you sort records, it just rearranges them. This was in order by customer ID originally. Now it's sorted in ascending order by state. And then we decide that we want to filter some records. So when you're filtering records, you will only see the rows of interest. It's a way of hiding some records. And there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can filter, as I mentioned. So what we're going to do is we'll filter this in a specific fashion, and we'll use several different ways of filtering. So again, you have that sort and filter group. You can click on filter, the filter button, and because I was already in the state field, it brings up what's almost a traditional filter screen from Excel, right? So I am going to uncheck select all and just check CA for California and click OK. So now I'm only seeing the California customers. That's one way of filtering. Now, a couple of visual cues for you to know that your table is filtered. A couple of things. First of all, on the ribbon, the toggle filter button and filter group will be shaded when you have a filtered record set. The other way of seeing it is way down at the bottom of your screen, right above the status bar, you'll see that it says it's filtered. If you want to get rid of the filter, well, you can click that toggle filter button on the ribbon, and now you have your full list back. It's still sorted in ascending order by state. I'm going to show you another way of doing the same filter. This time, I'm going to just right-click in any of the customer state fields that have CA for California. So I'm just using the first customer there. I'm right-clicking in the state field, and I'm going to choose from this list equals California. That's another way of doing the same thing. Conversely, now we want to clear that filter. So you can go ahead and toggle filter again. And then right click on California for that first record again. And I'll show you the opposite choice. Does not equal California. So when I click that one, it shows me all the other states except California. I think that's a pretty cool way of being able to filter by using the right click menu. Now we're going to toggle filter to clear that filter. And I'm going to show you another way of filtering. I'm just going to click on any field in that table. And this is called filtering by form and access. So in order to get to it, you're going to go in the sort and filter group. You're going to go ahead and click on that advanced button and choose filter by form. So it brings up whatever the last filter was, right? So not equal to California is the last thing we did in that state field. And we're going to just delete that, right? So filter by form, it basically gives you a blank form that you can fill out what you're looking to see. In that state drop down, we're going to select OR, and then we're going to click on toggle filter. So now we're filtered for Oregon. And that's kind of how that works. If you toggle filter again, then you have your full list. And if you want to undo that sort, we can sort by customer ID field in ascending order to get it back to the way it originally was. So I'm going to do the drop down arrow next to customer ID. And I'm going to choose sort smallest to largest. And now we're back to the way we were. This time, I'm going to want to close both of these tables at the same time. So I can right click on either table tab and choose close all. So now that we've sorted the table, the customer's table, that is considered a design change. So we're going to say yes to save those changes, and both tables are closed now. We briefly toured the relationships window when we were reviewing the Northwind database. Now we're going to get into relating table data. So we're going to explore different relationship types. You kind of got to know that in the background before you create relationships. We're going to go back to the relationships window, and we're going to create the relationships for our database. There are 3 types of relationships that you can create in an Access database. The most common, and it's the one that we saw in the Northwind, was the relationship between the customers table and the orders table. That was a one-to-many relationship. Again, one customer has many orders. It is the most common relationship type, and it's typically the default relationship type when you create a relationship. The many-to-many relationship cannot be created naturally in Access, meaning there's no way you can take 2 tables and create a many-to-many relationship. You have to have a third table, and it's normally called a junction table, something like that. So really, a many-to-many relationship is 2 different one-to-many relationships connected by a junction table. So many products are on many orders. Many orders have many products. That's kind of the English language version of a many-to-many relationship. And then you have a one-to-one, which is not common, really. Certain situations require it. So one department has one manager. That would be the English language translation of that type of relationship. We're going to create 6 relationships, and all of them will be one-to-many. Now, the slide that's on the screen right now, just so you know, this entire slide deck is also in the video description, but you don't have to worry about grabbing it right now. I will guide you through the relationships that we're going to create, which are listed on this slide. So in Access, we're going to go back up to the ribbon, and we're going to click on Database Tools. And in the Relationships group, we're going to click on Relationships to bring back the Relationships window. So the thing is, we don't have any tables in our Relationships window at this point because we haven't created any relationships. So the first thing that happens is the Show Table box comes up, And categories table is already selected. I'm going to click add at the bottom. I'm going to click on the next table, customers, add, and select the next 4 tables one at a time and add them to the relationships window. Once you have them added, go ahead and click the close button, and you'll see the tiles representing each of the tables in your database now in the relationships window. So one of the things I like to do when I'm working with table tiles, and this is not needed, I mean, Access doesn't care, is I kind of like to have my tiles so I can see all of the fields in that particular table, right? So just so I don't have to scroll down. I like to see all of the fields in a particular table, so you can manually take a few moments and get it sized just so you can see the fields and not have a scroll bar in the table. So in order to create a relationship, you're just going to drag the common field from one table to the other. So the first relationship we're going to create is between the orders table and the order details table. So in the orders table, the common field is order ID. I'm going to click and hold on the order ID in the orders table tile and drag it and drop it on top of order ID in the order details table tile. And when you let go, you get the edit relationships dialog box. So at the top, you can see the table is TBL orders and the field is order ID. And then you have TBL order details and order ID. So at this point, if you look all the way at the bottom of this screen, the relationship type is one-to-many. Now, we'll do a deeper dive into relationships security in a later lesson, but for right now, we're going to just click create. And so I'm going to just move my products table out of the way so I can drag orders over. And I see the join line between the tables. Now, what's different right now is it doesn't have a 1 and an infinity symbol like when we looked at this in the Northwind database. And you'll see when that actually happens when we revisit relationships a little bit later. But right now, it's a one-to-many relationship. If I double click the join line, it brings me back into edit relationships, and I'm going to just cancel that. I can also right click on the join line to get back into edit relationships or to delete the relationship. So we have our first relationship created. Now we want a one-to-many relationship between products and order details. I'm going to just drag my products tile down here. Again, the position of the tiles makes no difference to Access. And for this one, the common field is product ID. So in the products table, I'm going to click and hold on product ID and drag it and drop it on the product ID field in the order details table. Again, it shows the table instances, the common field, and the relationship type at the bottom. Go ahead and click create. The next one we're going to create is going to be between categories and products. So I'm not going to move my categories instance. It's not necessary. And the common field is category ID. So in my categories table, I'm going to just click and hold on category ID and drag it onto category ID in the products table, another one-to-many relationship, and I'm going to create. I think I misspoke. I think I said we were going to create like a whole bunch more, but I think I might have misspoke. So we have categories and products related. We have 2 more to do. So we are going to relate the customers table to the orders table, and the common field is customer ID. So I'm going to click and hold on it in the customers table, drag it and drop it onto customer ID in the orders table, and create. And we have one more, and that's the relationship between employees and customers. Now, this one is interesting. So I said good database design should have the fields, the common fields named the same, right? So in here, in our customers table, we have employee, and in our employees table, we have employee ID. It would be better if they were named the same thing, but they don't necessarily have to be. When I typically design a database, I make sure those matching fields have the same name. But this one, I did this on purpose because I want you to see that it doesn't really matter. So we're going to drag employee ID from the employees table onto employee in the customers table, and then click create. So now we've created our relationships. All of them are one-to-many, which is the most common relationship type. So the big question is, why are we relating these tables? Well, when we get to queries and even report design and stuff like that, if we want to ask a question of the database and the data is stored in two separate tables, the relationship between the table will allow us to pull that information into the query, which you'll see when we get to queries. We're going to go ahead and close our relationships window. It will always ask you if you want to save the changes to the layout once you've been in here and done some work, and you're going to say yes. Now that we have our table relationships set, we're going to start creating some commonly used queries. And we're going to do it two different ways in this lesson. We're going to use what's called the Simple Query Wizard, which will guide you through the steps. And then we'll create a query in Design View. Before we get into our queries, I just want to show you an impact in a table that happens as a result of creating a one-to-many relationship. So let's open the orders table by double-clicking it. And you'll notice right after the row header, before the order ID, you'll see a plus sign. So we related this table to the order details table. And one order may have many details. So this is the one side of the relationship. And that's why it has a plus sign. So when you click the plus sign for order ID 1, it shows you the order details for that particular order. So you don't have to open the order details table and reference it by order ID. It's right there on the one side of the one-to-many relationship. And I'm going to just collapse that and close the orders table. Now also, with the customers table, I'm going to open it. When we input customers, it had all numbers here, at least on my screen. And I since went and changed the numbers for the employee to their actual names. So if you want to, pause the video and take a moment and open your employees table and swap out the employees that are coming in by number if this pertains to you. It happened on my system, may not have happened on yours, but go ahead and replace them with the employee names that are showing on my screen. Once you're done with that, go ahead and close the customers table. And we're going to start creating our queries now. First, we're going to use what's called the Simple Query Wizard. So we're going to go to the Create tab on the ribbon. And in the Queries group, you'll see Query Wizard. Go ahead and click on it. So you have 4 different types of query wizards, and we will explore other types. But for right now, we're going to stick to the Simple Query Wizard, which is already selected. So go ahead and click OK. Now, when you do that, it shows a list. It says tables and queries, right? Which fields do you want in your query? You can choose from more than one table or query. So we're going to just do a simple one. We're going to use one table for this query. And you can choose, you can base a query off of another query or a table. Well, we don't have any other tables and any other queries yet. So when we do the drop down, we just see our tables, and we're going to create a query for products. So we're going to base it off of TBL products. And once you select that, it'll show you all the available fields on the left-hand side. Okay. And because we added a product manual file and attachment, you have all these other things. They're not going to pertain to what we're doing right now, but just we had the product manual field, but we added an attachment. So it created more fields, subfields to that product manual field for us. So now what we're going to do is select the fields that we want to see in the query. So we're going to double click product ID, or you could have clicked it once and done the right pointing arrow, the single right pointing arrow. The next field that we want is product name. We also want the price field and the category ID field. So we're just going to get those over to the right side under selected fields. And we're going to click next at the bottom. Now, when you get to this next screen, would you like a detail or summary query? We're going to leave it on detail, where it shows every field of every record, and we'll do next. And what title do you want for your query? Well, this is the title that actually shows in the query, but it's also what the name of the query is going to be. So we're going to name this using our naming convention for a query. We're going to change TBL to QRY, which is the prefix for query. And we are going to, let's see, just trying to clean up my typing here. And we're just going to call it QRY products, so we can get rid of the word query at the end of it, just QRY products. So the reason why these prefixes become important is because typically in a database, you'll have a table called products. You'll have a query called products. You might have a report called products. So this differentiates the different objects. And we're going to click finish. So it opens the query. You'll notice in your navigation pane, you have a query section now, and it has your QRY products in it. And you're seeing the fields that we requested. So that is using the simple query wizard. You can go ahead and close that query. And we're going to use the query wizard again to create another query, a simple query wizard. And we want it based off of the customers table. So the fields we want in this query, we want company name. So another way of getting it over to the right is just double click the field name and it switches it from the left to the right. We want the phone field. And we're selecting the fields in the order we want them to show in the query. And then we want address 1, city, state, zip. And we're going to also add the employee name. So we're going to do next. And we're going to name it QRY customers. So you can edit that. And then you can get rid of the word query at the end of it. Unnecessary, kind of redundant. It's already grouped in with the queries in your navigation pane. And we're going to click on finish. So there is the query, the question we asked of our data with the information that we asked it to provide us with. Go ahead and right click on the tab and close that query. Now that we've used the simple query wizard twice, we're going to create a query from scratch essentially by doing it in design view. So we're going to recreate this products query that we use the simple query wizard for, but we're going to do it from scratch. So on the create tab of the ribbon in the queries group, you're going to click on query design. And when you get into query design, it'll ask you it brings up the show table box. So it's asking you which tables are you using in this query. Now that we have relationships, we can use multiple related tables in a query. In our case, we're just using one table. So I'm going to double click TBL products. That's another way of getting it into design view. So, and then I'm going to close. And I'm going to just, with the tile, I'm going to expand it so I can see all of the fields. And you use the grid underneath to build your query. So what we're going to do is this. We're going to just select the same fields that we used before. And this is not a hard process. What I'm going to do is I'm going to double click the product ID field in the table tile, and it puts it in the first column in the grid underneath. And by the way, if you want more grid space, you can do the divider between the grid and the upper half where your table tiles will show. So you get a little bit more space. So I just double clicked that field and it told me the name of the field and the table that it's coming from in that first column in your grid. So the next field that we put in our products query is product name. I'm going to double click it. I'm also going to double click price. Notice it's going into subsequent columns, so you don't have to worry about that. Another way you can get the fields down there is to drag and drop them. So for category ID, I'm going to click and hold in the table tile, and I'm going to drag it to the field box in the fourth column. I think double clicking is a lot easier. Just my opinion. So now that we have this query set up, right, we're good to go. We're ready to view it. So if you look, you're on the query design tab of the ribbon right now because we're in query design, right? So you get that contextual tab. And the first button on that tab is view. And the second one is run. We're going to go ahead and click the run button. And so it looks just like query products that we already created, but we just did it a different way in design view. I'm going to right click and go back to design view for that query, right? And now it's time to save it. So I'm going to just right click the tab and I'm going to save it. And I want to name it QRY products. So it won't let us have two objects with the same name. So I'm going to just temporarily put a number 1 behind it. So QRY products 1 and click OK. And now close it. In order to delete a database object or rename a database object, it must be closed. So we're going to delete our products query that we use the simple query wizard to create. So I'm just going to right click on it in the navigation pane and choose delete. And it will confirm the deletion by saying yes. And then I'm going to right click on QRY products 1 and I'm going to choose rename and I'm going to just get rid of the number 1 at the end of it and click away from it. So again, objects have to be closed in order to delete them, rename them, so on and so forth. Now that we've created a few queries, you're going to learn how to add criteria for text number and date fields, and you'll get an introduction to using wildcards in criteria. So let's start with just regular criteria first. We're going to open the customer's query in design view by right-clicking it in the navigation pane, going right to design view. Even though we built this query using the simple query wizard, we can always go and edit it in design view. So what we're going to do here is we want to add some criteria. So we want this query to just show customers in a particular zip code. So what we're going to do is in the zip column on the lower half in your grid, there is, you'll notice in the grid, you have a field, row, table, sort, show, criteria, and or. We're going to be in the criteria cell on this one for the zip code field. So right underneath the show check mark in the zip column, you're going to click. And you're just going to type in 97045. Now, a suggestion. Whenever you're using the grid here in query design, you're going to want to tab after you type something out. If it needs double quotes around something, when you tab, it will give it to you. So the zip field, remember, is a short text field. Text fields have to be enclosed in double quotes. You don't have to type them. You just have to remember to tab outside of the cell after you get it in there. So now if you want to see if this works, you have a choice. We can view it or we can run it. I'm going to just go and click the upper half of the view button there, and you can see that it's just showing me 2 customers that are in that zip code. I can click the upper half of the view button again to get back to design view. So we made that change to this query. Pretty simple criteria. We just went to the zip criteria cell and we put in the zip code that we were interested in seeing. And so let's go ahead and delete that zip code criteria. And we want to do a different criteria. We want to see all states in our customers table, all of the states that begin with the letter I. So in your state criteria field, that cell underneath the checkbox for state in the state column, you're going to type the letter I and you're going to type an asterisk. And so I asterisk means show me everything that begins with the letter I. I'm going to tab out of that cell and you'll see what it does. In order to do something like that, you have to use the keyword like. So like I, and the I and the asterisk have to be in double quotes. We didn't have to type that. We just had to remember to tab out of that cell. Go ahead and click the upper half of your view button, and you can see that we have the customers from the states of Idaho and Illinois, our 2 I states within the data. You can click the upper half to get back to design view and go ahead. And you know what? We can keep that like I criteria in there. Actually, no, let's get rid of it. I have a better idea. Let's get rid of like I for right now, just so we have no criteria in here. And then just go ahead and close it. And if it prompts you to save changes, say no, because we don't want any of that criteria in there. So let's say we wanted another query. I'm deviating a little bit, but if we want to have our total customer query like we do, and we want another one that's just for the I states, right? We can copy. So I'm going to right click on QRY customers and I'm going to copy. And then I'm just going to right click in the navigation pane and paste. So it comes up with paste as copy of query customers. We're going to delete the words copy of, and at the end of QRY customers, we're going to put Idaho, Illinois. So I just did capital I's on those. QRY customer, Idaho, Illinois, and click OK. Now, right click on that new query and go to design view and go ahead for the state in your criteria cell, put in I asterisk and tab out of there. And then you're going to right click on the tab, save it and close it. So now you have your intact, all of your customers query. And if you double click query customers, Idaho, Illinois, you'll see that it just has that criteria being recognized in there. So you can have both. And I'm going to just close that one. Now in the slide deck that's in the video description, I have a link to Microsoft's site that gives you all the information about wildcards in queries and parameters in Access. So I just clicked on the link and this is what it brings up. So it's showing you the asterisk here, right? We did I asterisk. So that's like anything starting with the letter I, right? Doesn't matter what follows it. So it's this is a good reference article for you. So if I did an asterisk in this example, asterisk owner asterisk, it would show in that particular field wherever the letters OWNER are. So let's say it was a company name field, right? And somewhere in that field, it has that. So we're putting an asterisk, which means any number of characters before and an asterisk afterwards. If we wanted to find something that started with owner followed by any number of characters, we'd use the second example here, owner and then asterisk. And then we had, and that's what we did with the state, the letter I and then an asterisk. So I followed by anything. And then if you have it at the beginning, any number of characters followed by OWNER. So there's more things that we haven't gotten to in this article, but I wanted to give you this reference article. Like, for example, criteria. If, let's say we had company name, for example, we could do like, and then in quotes and square brackets, A through H, right? That means any company name in my example that begins with the letters A through H, something like that, or contains the letters A through H. Now, the second example, number 4 there, it has like A through H in the brackets, and it has the asterisk afterwards. So any company name that begins with the letters A through H is what that one does. So it has, in this article, it has a table of all the wildcard characters, what they do, and it gives you an example of how to use it on the right. So I thought that would be a good idea to include in this course, just so you have it for your reference. We'll be getting into more advanced queries once we get to modules 3 and 4. So module 1 has been action-packed. We got introduced to the concept of relational databases. We reviewed the Northwind database, the freeware database that you can get from within Access. You learned about the Access environment. We then went over the planning steps and created a new database, and we did the same for database tables. We created a couple of tables, but then we used the import from Excel to create and populate the balance of our tables. We sorted and filtered table data. We created the relationships between the tables. And we went over some commonly used queries and customized them with criteria. Now we're going to move on to module 2.